The Pittsburgh Pirates decided to make two new additions to the roster this weekend, and we're going to talk about it today.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, as I said to my wonderful Monday guest, Gary Morgan, who's joining me this Monday, there's two more Mondays, folks, before we have regular season Pirates baseball. It's inching closer and closer. And welcome back, of course, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're at your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every day. Today's episode, of course, brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. And if you want to throw some money on Duquesne to win the men's tournament, you make a lot of money if you do it over at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. But we'll see what they do in round one against BYU because, hey, at least one Duke team got an automatic bid. Anyways, that's just a little slight there. But guys, folks, Gary's here. Ethan's here on Monday. Of course, this episode will be coming out to you probably around 11:30, 12 o'clock, as it usually does every Monday. But the Pittsburgh Pirates, along with, I guess, just every Pittsburgh team at this point, just decided to do some stuff this weekend. And I had a friend of mine text me and say, with the things that have happened in Pittsburgh this past week, as far as acquisitions and just everything, that we could have a Pittsburgh version of what's the name of the song? We Didn't Start the Fire. There it is. Like, we could literally have a Pittsburgh version of that based off of what happened this week. And the Pirates contributed to all the Pittsburgh craziness this weekend, acquiring outfielder Michael A. Taylor and, of course, starting pitcher Domingo German. Gary, I think me and you were on this Michael A. Taylor stuff pretty early on in the offseason. It was one of the guys that I remember in my offseason wish list that I wanted him on this team. I mean, you're looking at a guy, 220 average last year, 21 home runs, 720 OPS, but in all honesty, you're not really bringing him in for the bat. You're looking at a guy that has an amazing glove in center field, has done phenomenal things out there, could probably easily play all three outfield spots at PNC Park. Gary, what were your immediate thoughts on this when this first got announced?
I mean, I thought the one place they really, really needed an upgrade in the outfield was center field. And I still think Jack Sawinski is going to wind up starting there most of the time, but Michael Taylor will get his fair share out there when he plays. I'd imagine he's always going to play center field when he goes in. He could play all of them, but center field's what he'll do because he's the best one we've had here since Starling Marte. Quite honestly, you're going to love watching him play out there, really. He covers a lot of ground. He gets to everything he should. He's got a strong arm. He makes good decisions. He's a real field general out there, which this team has sorely needed for a long time. In center field, somebody that can understand the athleticism that Reynolds and Sawinski have and not get in the way, take charge, decide whose ball is who. That's the type of player they've got here, and he's not going to impress you with his bat. I think the home runs are probably a misnomer, but it doesn't matter. Like, he's here for the defense, to strengthen that defense up the middle.
Yeah, and really, at the end of the day, when you look at his StatCast page, you guys know if you listen to this show that I love StatCast. I mean, you're looking at a guy who was in the 94th percentile in outs above average, 88th in arm value, 90th in arm strength, 84th in sprint speed. The defense is there. He had a 9 running value, fielding run value last year. Pretty good on the base path, too, if he gets on base. I mean, he had a 77th percentile base running value last year. And, yeah, the bat's not going to impress you all that much. He strikes out a good bit. He had a 33.5% strikeout rate last year. Whiffs a lot, too. But when he hits the baseball, folks, he hits the baseball. You're looking at a 13.5 barrel rate last year, which was in the 88th percentile. So he's one of those guys that, yeah, occasionally he's going to put the ball over the fence. But at the end of the day, you're bringing him in for $4 million, which at first I thought was a lot cheaper than initially what I thought it would take to get him. But with his market now being what it was, and you also saying that he's likely not going to be a full-time starter, yeah, that's kind of money that you're looking at and saying, okay, yeah, that's fine. And it's not
that's
really
best for him, though. If you look at his career, like
Mhm.
He's really a splits demon. Like, he shouldn't face right-handed pitching very much.
No.
He's not good against it. So even if you just decided that Jack needed a full-time platoon, this is a good signing. You understand? Like, that's how impactful he can be. I think if you face him mostly against lefties and bring him in as a late inning substitution to like kind of shore up the defense and slide Jack over to left, I think you probably strengthen your overall team. That's really the goal here. $4 million to strengthen the overall team bench options. That's it.
Yeah, and you mentioned to me as well, you were mentioning kind of shuffling the outfield around a little bit, that we've seen Brian Reynolds in the last couple of games playing right field, which would now mean in his career, if he starts playing right field, we would have seen Brian Reynolds full-time at all three outfield positions. Now, we all know, of course, Brian Reynolds not exactly known for his glove all that much out there in the outfield. But again, I don't see how this signing is really bad in any light. I mean, at the end of the day, if he hits 10 home runs in a platoon with Jack Sawinski and Jack Sawinski does Jack Sawinski things and Michael A. Taylor doesn't have a massive drop-off defensively, which he won't, then yeah, this is a great signing. Now, this also, and I wanted to ask you this before I shared my thoughts on it, you look at like the right field battle that I talked about a lot in spring, that we talked about a lot in spring with Edward Olivares and Joshua Palacios. Where does that leave those guys now? I think is a fun question also. And maybe a reactionary move to not seeing what they hope they would see in spring from those guys so far.
I mean, Palacios has barely played. He's been injured.
He's been hurt. Yeah.
He's been injured, then he was sick, and now, it seems like the injury is nagging. So, he's not playing. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to judge. And I think with Joshua Palacios, as exciting as he was last year, I think you really need to look at his OPS and realize, like, yeah, he did some really timely, awesome things, but he didn't do them an awful lot when it wasn't timely. Now, there's a place for a guy like that. I'm not saying there's not, but this was a minor league Roll 5 pick last year. To get the opportunity he got last year is already like winning.
Yeah.
You don't guarantee a guy like that a spot, I don't think he's going to start on the team. I think he could start on the IL. He could just start out in AAA on his option. That's okay. Olivares, I don't think, has shown that he can play all the positions that they need covered. I think they've tried him in center field a few times. They're still doing it. I just don't think that he's got the range to handle it. And I think that seeing that probably helped them make this decision to sign Michael Taylor. But if anything, I would say McKinney is the guy who probably gets screwed by this signing, because I think he had probably worked his way into the conversation as far as getting a spot, and there's just no way now.
No. And I also think when you walk away as fans, like not even from the like analytics standpoint, but when you walk away as fans and you could tell me that your four outfielders are Jack Sawinski, Brian Reynolds, Michael A. Taylor, and who am I forgetting?
Olivares.
Yeah, I mean, I think you walk away from that pretty happy, I think, especially if you're saying for Olivares, hey, just slot in when you have to, hit the baseball hard like you know how to, and then you're good.
And Connor Joe. Connor Joe's going to play out there a lot too.
Yeah, we know Connor Joe, and I mean, we've seen things with him playing second base, first base, outfield. I think Connor Joe is going to have a lot bigger role on this team than people think he is going to, and let that be what it is, folks. Connor Joe is actually a pretty solid player to have in that kind of role on this team. And as far as the other acquisition that they made, it was Domingo German. Feelings aside, fine signing, especially minor league deal. Feelings aside for like however anybody wants to feel about it. We've already heard pretty much from the team, from reports, that they're going to make him work for it. He's not just going to get handed a spot, and that's the whole point of a minor league deal, obviously. Last year, I believe it was the last year or the year before that he had the perfect game?
Last year.
So looking at a guy like that, 4.56 ERA, 20 starts last year, 108 innings, 1.08 whip, fine. But again, I would honestly be shocked if you even see him get a call up at all this year. I just really am, just the way it seems that the team is handling it. And that's just really, at the end of the day, you're looking at a guy, he's going to miss bats, strikes out guys a good bit at 25.7% last year, doesn't elicit a lot of ground balls, gives up some hard contact every now and then. Just pretty much more pitchers on the roster is really, I think, the biggest takeaway for German being on the roster.
I mean, the Pirates are taking the risk. They're paying him $1.5 million. They gave themselves a team option as a reward for that. So if he does well, it's completely their decision whether they want to bring him back next year. So if he does come up and catch fire and turns into something, then, he's not just going to walk away and let some other team not deal with the PR mess that he left behind. They'll get the benefit of it. And I think what's important here is the caveat is he has to perform both on and off the field. And if he doesn't, he won't be here. That PR mess is going to stay in the minors until they can sew a pretty nice story that it's not a mess anymore.
Yeah. And ultimately, there's a lot to say about some of the acquisitions the Pirates have made this offseason for a multitude of reasons. But I would also say that these moves just ultimately were good in both their own rights. If you're just looking at it from a baseball standpoint, you had a starter who's 31. If worse comes to worse, you have to go to him in an injury situation. Michael A. Taylor shores up the defense in the outfield a lot more, adds some pop to the lineup again, which we've seen a lot of this spring. And it's not just spring training anymore. It's becoming a trend that the Pirates are hitting the baseball over the fence quite a bit this year. And I think you walk away from both of these moves and say, yeah, the Pirates got better by making both of these decisions. I really do. And
at least got deeper, and that's arguably more important on the mound.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you also look at the old adage, you can never have too many pitchers. Well, yeah, look at what the Yankees are dealing with right now with Garrett Cole being on the shelf for 2 months and maybe longer. That whole rotation is just all over the place now because one guy got hurt. We've said it before here too, folks, and we hope it doesn't happen, and I'll knock on wood on it again. If Mitch Keller gets hurt, this whole rotation it gets funky really fast. And that's why you want to have a lot of these pitchers, and having pitchers now like Domingo German, Eric Lauer, who have done it before. I think that's going to help them in the long run. Speaking of a pitcher that has done some things this spring training, we're going to discuss Jared Jones, and you're going to also be seeing Jared Jones on 5 Thoughts at 5 on Steel City Pirates later from Gary. But he's making a pretty good case for opening day. So we're going to discuss that here in a moment. But before we do, we're going to talk about FanDuel. March Madness is here, and Pitt fans, I know how you feel about it. It's fine. It's just I disagree with it. I didn't really watch a lot of Pitt basketball this year, but when I see that other teams are saying that Pitt should have been in the tournament, I'll believe them. And say goodbye, by the way, to those busted brackets that you're going to probably make, because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the tournament. So if you think Duquesne can beat BYU, go bet on it at FanDuel, because whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets, because FanDuel is an official sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. And go to FanDuel.com/lockedon for all of your betting needs today. And also, don't forget that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. And baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for the best MLB season preview, coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. You can find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel here on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. That's going to be a very fun little thing for you guys, especially for the NL Central. We talk about who's going to win the division, who's going to be potential all-stars from the division, who could be an MVP candidate, who's going to finish last. And that answer might shock you whenever you listen to it, because it shocked me a little bit. But as we continue with today's show, Jared Jones has been a talk of the spring training for quite a bit now, because he came into spring already one of the top guys. Looking at the number 3 prospect overall via MLB Pipeline for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I've been an advocate to say that I think he should start in the minors. That is kind of changing for me now because of what we've seen in spring. He has just been, to put it bluntly, electric. He really has. He goes out there, does what he needs to do. He's making guys look silly. Even the Braves broadcast, when they played at the Atlanta Braves the other day, said that he'd never seen this lineup swing so silly in his life. Now, albeit it's spring training, you're not facing every team's best players every single day. But there's also the thought of, if you can put your best players on your roster right now, it's hard to argue that Jared Jones isn't one of the 5 best pitchers in the rotation right now with what we've seen in spring training. And Gary, I'll let you share some of your thoughts as well, since you'll have more at 5:00 today.
Yeah, I mean, he's performed better than any of their starters. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He's also doing a lot of what he did last year. You know, I haven't really seen him start working in the changeup as much as I'd like to see, but hey, he hasn't needed it either. So I'm not going to complain too much about it. I'm just going to go ahead with my hot take. Jared Jones won't spend all year on the Major League club.
No.
And I say that specifically in that way because it's really going to be about his innings. And I don't care if they start him right away in Major League Baseball. He's going to have to at some point have one of those valley moments where they send him down like they did with Rowanzi a couple of years ago to kind of try to save his arm, where they shut him down almost mid-season and give him a little bit of a break and then build him back up so that they can redeploy him. Didn't work well with Rowe, but they only had about 100 innings they were working with Rowe. I think Jones, they'll be somewhere in the 150 range. He's never pitched more than 126. That's, not that crazy of a projection. If he goes beyond that, I think maybe you start looking at some of the lessons that you hope they learned with Johan Oviedo last year.
Yeah.
And I hope that some fans learn those lessons too, because it's going to be painful watching him get shut down, and people are going to immediately start crying about manipulation. But while it's true the Pirates will get something good out of it, it's also going to be driven by this innings story. And I think you could say most of this same stuff for Paul Skeens.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to be seeing those narratives all year as far as like how many innings they can throw, how quickly are they ramping them up? Are they letting them go 5-6 innings in the minors? If they are, that might be a waste of their arm. Things like that. We're gonna have discussions surrounding them all season. Jared Jones could certainly start. There's just other factors.
And I think too that it's definitely an interesting thing where I've had the conversation with Jared Jones and Paul Skeens and like who would come up first. And I've always told everybody that it's going to be Jared Jones first. No matter what, Jared Jones will be the first of the two to come up. Be that opening day, be that May, be that whenever they decide to do it. So now that you've kind of outlined that, and I've thought about it too, that yeah, Jones could come up here and then get shut down and then come back. Is there a world where maybe you do the same thing with Skeens, but just on a different timetable? And then when you shut down Jared Jones later in the year, and you've already maybe done that with Skeens and given him his break, maybe that's where you guys who want both of them up at the same time, you can start thinking about this now, where it's like Skeens could come up when Jared Jones goes back, and then they ramp him back up. Then you're working with both of them in what some consider a year where the Pirates could compete in the Central. So when would you rather have Jared Jones? Would you rather have him in April and May, or would you rather have him available in August and September? Albeit the games mean the exact same to your record, but say the Pirates are in a legit NL Central pennant race and you did take your time to let Jared Jones rest and let Paul Skeens rest, and then they're ready to go in September, folks, that rotation looks a lot better to me than it does right now. But it doesn't have to be right now.
There's so many assumptions built into all this too. Like, one, that he'll come up and perform. Like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people look at that innings restriction and they start panicking right away. They're going to hold him back. They're going to not. You got to pitch pretty damn good to throw 150 innings.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you have to do pretty well to get there. The Pirates have exactly one pitcher that's going to threaten 200 innings this year, and it's Mitch Keller. And he's it. That's the list. They don't have anyone else in their entire system that's going to threaten 200 innings.
No.
So, I mean, like, you can dream about what you think these guys are going to do, but they are going to hold them back. I think it really is going to take a village this year to eat the innings. They have a lot of guys that are going to have these same restrictions. So I guess, like, look at it a little different this year as you're watching things, and maybe understand, like, this is why they're giving Eric Lauer a shot instead of bringing up Jared Jones. This is why they're giving Willie Peralta a few starts instead of starting Paul Skeens. And yes, they're not as good.
Oh yeah, and I've already even said, and this will be something, we have a 3-part prediction show next week that you'll be a part of on Monday, more than likely, where I was going to give bold takes for the season. And I've already said this, and I don't know if it's really a bold take, but don't be shocked that the Pirates have 10 to 15, maybe even more than that, starters this year that get starts. I would not be shocked at all. I mean, you're factoring in Rowanzi, you're factoring in Ortiz, you're factoring in Priester. You already mentioned Peralta. You already mentioned Eric Lauer. You could even throw Herman in there if he figures out everything off the field and on the field. That's not even counting Keller, Perez, and Gonzalez, who you know are going to get starts. And God forbid, maybe Bailey Falter gets starts. You're already up to 11 or 12 guys at that point. That's not even factoring in Jared Jones. That's not factoring in Paul Skeens. That's not factoring in anybody really that you think can get starts this year. It would not shock me if the Pirates have 15 plus guys get starts this year just because the innings have to be there.
Yeah, and that's the dark side. That's the dark side of things where, you're talking about mowing through all these guys and, you're factoring in injuries and everything. Of course, you have to do that. But as we look at, like, whatever they start with, let's say it's, Gonzalez, Perez, Keller, Ortiz, and Priester. Let's just go with that as our starting 5. Let's not even pretend we know. What if they do well? Like, what if all 5 of those do well?
Yeah.
I think that's a stretch to think that'll happen, but is it such a stretch to think that, like, we're automatically deciding when Jones and Skeens should be up here? What if there's people performing in their place? What if Eric Lauer looks like the Eric Lauer of 3 years ago? What if Chase Anderson is just shoving? I mean, like, there's a lot of guys like that I think are going to get a shot, and probably frustratingly so to a lot of fans. But this is what you want. You want hard decisions. You want guys performing so well that they're pushing other guys who are performing out of the way or into the bullpen.
Yeah, and I think Jones and Skeens have that same opportunity on the inverse. If they're performing really well and there's another guy performing really well, maybe at some point you just say, okay, yeah, he's performing better than him, even though this guy isn't performing bad either, which usually is going to translate to wins. And as I've said about the NL Central in that Know Your Enemy series that I did, this division is going to be decided by pitching. Like it or not, it just is. Look at every rotation in this division right now, and whichever one performs the best is probably the team that's going to walk away with the NL Central pennant this year. By the way, before we get to NL Central pennants, we still have spring to worry about. There's still about a week and a half of spring games left, but me and Gary are going to share our thoughts on some things we've seen from spring and if they could translate to the regular season. But before we do that, we're going to talk about eBay Motors. There are millions of parts for your MVP, and you can win every time with parts that fit your ride, because passion, drive, and patience are what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. And whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right. Well, Gary is fresh off of being in Bradenton, Florida, and seeing some things down there, including the spring breakout game. Just full transparency, I did not get to watch it because I was working, so I got to see highlights of it. It looked like it was just a phenomenal event for baseball. It's something baseball needs to just lean into more with prospects. I think more events on the calendar that are just centered around prospects in baseball is a good thing, because it just, to me, it educates people. It educates people on who these guys are and some of these guys that you may not know. Like, obviously, we all know Paul Skeens. There's probably a good chunk of people in Pirates land that have no idea who Shaylin Polanco is. They're probably like, who is this guy? And I loathe over him. I think he's going to be phenomenal. But spring is almost done, and there's still a lot of people on this roster. So I think the next week is going to be very busy in terms of who we see get optioned, who we see get sent to minor league camp, all that other stuff. And you'll get a better grasp on the opening day roster, which is why I've pushed off my prediction show to next week. So what are some things in spring, Gary, that you've seen that you think can translate to the regular season this year from the Pirates?
Oh, man. I think the first thing I can say is that they have a lot of live arms. I think we're going to see a lot of that translate to the regular season. I think they have good depth on the pitching staff. I really do. The bullpen is going to be lights out. I think that's going to continue. And I think some of the starting options that fall into the bullpen are of a higher quality than what we've seen fall into the bullpen in the past. So I like the depth. I may not like how tested it is. I may not feel comfortable with how tested a lot of it is, but I think the pitching is going to hold up better than we think. I think the overall offense is probably going to play better. I'm looking at this roster now more almost like I could play Yahtzee with the names, except Rowdy Tellez. Take him out of that mix, but you could just put everybody's name in a cup and roll them out. And I think whatever order those 9 fall in, it's probably going to be a pretty decent lineup. That has not been something I think we've been able to say in the past, and I think it's going to stick. As far as the power goes, some of it's wind aided, of course. Some of it is ballpark dimension aided, of course. But the very real pop is there. It's major league pop. They may not lead the league in home runs. I don't think they will, like they are in spring.
I'm not going that far.
But they've got guys like O'Neal Cruz that's going to hit a certain amount if he's healthy. Jack's going to hit a certain amount if he's healthy. Brian has shown you year after year he's going to hit a certain amount. Brian Hayes is at least going to hit what he has, if not more. And then, Rowdy Tellez, I think that's the only thing you can really count on he will do is hit some haters. So and Henry Davis is no slouch either, is he? And he's going to play. So, I think the power potential on this team is actually pretty sick.
Yeah, and I think also with that power potential, it's going to translate again to wins. I'm pulling this all together now for everybody to say that having all these pitchers, albeit not the greatest pitchers in the world, we're not going to sit here and act like that, but there is a real positive thing to have this many pitchers you can look at and say, if he's in the rotation or if he's getting a couple starts here and there, you're not going to shy away from it and say, this is absolutely horrible. I don't want to crap on the guy, but I don't really think any of these options are Chase DeYoung level. Or when you see Chase DeYoung go out on the mound, you're like, oh God, what's going to happen today? Or you know what I mean? These options feel like, okay, there might be something here. Like with Willie Peralta, Chase Anderson, Eric Lauer, and Herman. If they don't work out, oh well. I mean, it'll suck because then you're losing some of that depth that we keep talking about. But then say if those guys don't perform well and then Rowe, Ortiz, and Priester do, or one of them do, then I think you walk away with it okay. Like you're going to walk away with this all fine. And I've said it on this show multiple times, and I think it's going to be a real thing. Look at what we've seen from the pitching in spring. You mentioned it already. The bullpen, again, it's going to be a top 10 unit in baseball. I know Dauri Moreta might be out for a while. We don't really know what's going on with Bednar. I know he's ramping up and throwing a little bit more. They have enough good arms in that bullpen right now to not even really worry about that. And I even mentioned David Bednar's name to say they don't have to worry about it all that much. Because you have Majinski, you have Chapman, you have Holderman. Jose Hernandez has looked pretty good this spring as well. And he was a Rule 5 pick last year that got thrust into a role that he was not ready for. He looks like he might be ready for it now. That's without me even mentioning Ryan Barucki. You mentioned the starting options that could go there. Luis Ortiz as a long relief option, I think, would be a phenomenal idea for him to start off. I really do, unless you really want to see him as a starter. But then you move to the rotation, and we've mentioned Skeens, Jones, all the options behind them. And I'll say it as I've said it before, folks, you're going to love this rotation a lot more than you do right now by the end of the year. Gary said it last year, too, about just the team overall, that you would like the team more last year at the end of the year than you did at the beginning. The rotation specifically, you will love this rotation a lot more going into 2025 with a guy like Johan Oviedo coming back, mind you. And we've had that conversation already as well, that he might not even have a spot going into 2025.
You have to look at all kinds of factors when you start talking about predicting the roster and the rotation. And you look at some of the out clauses that some of these NRIs have too, like Chase Anderson, by 323, they have to give him his outright release if he's not going to make the team. So, you're going to have that decision made here within 5 days. A couple days later, Honeywell. I mean, so if you're going to use some of these guys or have them on your roster, well, you're going to use them. And they're building up Chase Anderson to be a starter. So don't be shocked if he's that fifth guy. Like that's a factor that we don't consider when you start talking about like who's best. I can tell you right now, Jared Jones is a better pitcher than him probably.
Yeah.
But Chase Anderson's done it in this league. And Chase Anderson can probably give them some very valuable innings early on that someone else won't have to.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, again, this is the last Monday before we have Monday next week, but this is the last full week before opening day baseball is here, folks. For the Pirates, by the way, I know we have the Soul Series this week. A lot of people, I honestly forgot about it until like yesterday that it was happening. But for the Pirates, March 28th, 4:10 Eastern time against the Miami Marlins. It's going to be fun. Next week, obviously, prediction show. We're going to have multiple shows that day for opening day, probably multiple shows the day after. And as far as this week goes, we're just going to keep up with the news cycle. Going to be having stuff over at Steel City Pirates. Obviously, Gary will have your 5 thoughts at 5 this week coming out later. What do you got going on the Pirates fan forum this week, Gary?
Probably just Jim and I. We're going to try to recover further from my spring training trip. I was too tired to get into too much last week, but this week we'll be able to talk about some other moves we didn't touch on, like German. Maybe we'll have a full week to think about it and see what we think. Yeah,
and it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun season, folks. I really think this year has the potential to be arguably the funnest Pirate season we've seen in a while. We'll be covering it all here on Locked On Pirates. Again, my name is Ethan Smith. You can follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan. That's Gary Morgan. You can follow him on Twitter at GaryMo2007. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday. I'll see you tomorrow. But until then, see yous on the flip side.